The cafe smelled of butter and sharp coffee, a place meant for postcards and tourist snapshots. But for me, it was the backdrop of humiliation. Belle leaned across her mimosa, pastel jacket gleaming, jeweled earrings catching the light, and smirked. "You're lucky we even include you, even though you're useless." Her words sliced deeper than the silverware between us. My son Asher adjusted his cufflinks, eyes glued to his phone, pretending not to hear. My aunt stirred her iced tea with a nod that told me she agreed. Around us, waiters carried plates of eggs folded like origami, but bitterness was the only taste in my mouth. I forced a smile, one that ached behind my eyes, and swallowed silence as I always had. For years, peace in our family meant absorbing every insult, bearing every responsibility, pretending respect was a debt I had yet to pay. But as I sipped my coffee that morning, I felt something inside me shift. I knew I could not sit at that table again without changing everything about the role I had been forced to play.
My name is Rowena Hartley, and for decades my worth was measured by what I carried for others. When Asher was still in grade school, I worked long hours as a purchasing coordinator at a hospital in Houston. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady. Contracts, vendor negotiations, spreadsheets, those skills kept the lights on at work and at home. Raising him alone after the divorce left no room for mistakes. I skipped vacations, worked weekends, and built a spotless credit history. My siblings knew they could call me when their cards declined. My aunt leaned on me to book hotels because she claimed she never could figure them out. At first, I told myself it was kindness. Then I told myself it was duty. Eventually, it simply became who I was, the reliable one. Asher's needs began small, a down payment for his first apartment, a credit card he promised to pay off when his bonus arrived. The bonus never came. Later, it was overdrafts, deposits, urgent loans to bridge the gap before a deal closed. I told myself I was giving him security, the kind I never had. But somewhere along the way, their requests stopped sounding like requests. The assumption hardened: if Rowena has it, Rowena will give it. My responsibility had turned into a chain I could no longer loosen. The heaviest link of all was the lake house. The lake house at Cato Lake was always called ours. But in truth, it had only ever been mine to bear. In 2009, when my father's loan defaulted and foreclosure notices piled high, no one else had the credit or stability to save it. Every eye turned to me. I signed the papers, took on the debt, and quietly became the sole owner. From then on, the taxes, insurance, and utilities drained from my account like clockwork. I drove 3 hours from Houston to clear branches, meet repair crews, shovel mud from floods. And yet, every weekend they arrived with coolers and friends, posted photos, and left behind empty beer cans. They never asked how the lights stayed on or who paid the propane. They assumed it was handled, assumed it was free. Belle even lent the cabin to her friends, calling it a family legacy. I let the insult pass, swallowing anger like medicine. But after that brunch, I could no longer ignore the truth. The cabin was not proof I belonged. It was just another bill, another invisible sacrifice. On the long drive back from New Orleans, I didn't replay Belle's smirk. I made lists. What was in my name? What debts I carried alone? What chains I had forged with my own sense of duty? When I crossed back into Texas, my decision had already begun to take shape. That night, Houston was quiet. I set down my purse, brewed peppermint tea, and opened my laptop. The family credit account blinked on the screen. Each authorized user neatly listed Asher, Belle, my aunt, my brother, groceries, hotel stays, shopping sprees all under my name. For years, I had tracked every line, sent reminders, tried to keep the peace. That night, I began removing names, one by one. The system asked, "Are you sure one by one?" I clicked, yes. By midnight, only my name remained. Next, I wrote to Jared, the attorney and marshal who once helped me keep the cabin from foreclosure. The subject line was simple, "Ready now." I didn't explain. He would understand. The sale of the cabin was no longer an idea. It was my escape. Then I opened a blank document and typed Asher's name. I listed the loan he had promised to repay after a bonus that never came. 30 days, repayment in full. My hand hovered over my phone, tempted to call him, to soften it, but I didn't. I shut the phone off, closed the laptop, and let the silence settle. For the first time in years, I felt calm. The morning brought the first ripple of consequences. Belle's messages arrived before dawn, each more frantic than the last. Their card had been declined at a restaurant, and she was humiliated in front of friends. I let the phone dim and poured hot water over my tea. By noon, past due notices arrived for the lake house utilities, the electric company threatening suspension. Asher's calls came that evening first with charm, then with anger. "Mom, there must be a mistake. You can't just shut things down without telling me." I set the phone face down and let it ring. By the weekend, the family group chat buzzed with complaints about unpaid bills and overgrown grass at the cabin porch. Not one of them asked how I was. Not one of them remembered the years I had carried it all alone. For once, I didn't rush in to fix it. I muted the chat, stepped onto my balcony, and felt something I hadn't in years: lightness. Their chaos was proof of my absence, proof that I had finally let the chains fall away. And I knew this was only the beginning of what was to come. I left Houston before sunrise. The highway stretched quiet beneath the fading stars. 3 hours of pine trees and winding roads led me to Caddo Lake. The cabin stood as it always had, porch sagging, shutters needing paint, the air carrying the faint scent of cedar. For years I had arrived with tools and supplies, ready to mend what storms or neglect had broken. But this time, I walked through the rooms with different eyes. Dust lay on shelves, photographs hung crooked on the walls, my son as a boy holding his first fish, my parents smiling on the porch, cousins sprawled on the lawn. I took each frame down carefully, wrapping them in newspaper, not in anger, but in clarity. These were not family heirlooms. They were fragments of my labor, and I no longer needed to leave them behind. At the desk in the corner, I opened my laptop and typed a message to Jared. "Proceed with a private listing. No public notice until the title is clear." My finger hovered only a moment before pressing send. It was done. As I loaded the box into my car, a voice called from the fence line. It was Inz Budrow, the neighbor who had lived here longer than anyone. She leaned on the post, eyes sharp but kind. "I always wondered how you kept this place going," she said softly. Never once saw anyone else doing the work. Her words landed heavier than she knew. For years, I had convinced myself no one noticed. Yet here was proof someone had. I nodded, grateful, and closed the trunk with finality. 2 days later, an email arrived from Inz. She had attached a screenshot with no explanation. I hesitated, half expecting another forwarded utility notice. Instead, I saw a fragment of a mortgage application, Asher's name at the top. He had tried to refinance the cabin, hoping to add himself to the deed once ownership transferred. The loan officer's reply was blunt. "Title is solely under Rowena Hartley.
It cannot be altered without her consent. My chest tightened as I read those lines again and again. He had known. He had always known that the cabin was mine, that every receipt, every tax record bore only my name. Yet he stood silent while Belle sneered, letting me be painted as the burden clinging to a legacy that supposedly belonged to all. The betrayal wasn't in his silence. It was in his choice to protect the lie. He could have corrected Belle with a single sentence. But instead, he let her wield the insult, preserving his easy smile at my expense. That night, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the glow of my laptop. For years, I told myself Asher was avoiding conflict, torn between loyalties. Now I saw avoidance for what it was, its own form of betrayal. The quiet consent that keeps injustice alive. It was nearly dusk when the knock came. Firm at first, then insistent. Through the peephole, I saw Asher on the porch, Belle beside him, their figures framed by the fading light. I opened the door just wide enough for the breeze, but not wide enough to invite them inside. Asher's voice was tight, rehearsed. "Mom, we need to talk." Belle cut in, her tone sharp and accusatory. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this has been? Declined cards? Utilities shut off at the lake. You've embarrassed all of us." I let her words hang. Asher softened his tone, reaching for guilt. "The cabin's part of our family history. Think of the grandkids. They'll never know those summers if you sell it." I stepped back long enough to retrieve the folder I had prepared. Inside were the deed records, the insurance policies, and the mortgage inquiry screenshot. I handed it to him without a word. His eyes skimmed the page, and I watched the color drain from his face. "You knew," I said quietly. "You knew it was mine, and you let her treat me like the problem." Belle shifted, her confidence cracking. "This is being blown out of proportion. We could have worked something out." I shook my head. "Sons don't treat their mothers like ATMs. Wives don't rewrite deeds with sneers and entitlement. This cycle ends tonight." Asher blinked hard, as though searching for the mother who always said yes. But I wasn't her anymore. I steadied my hand on the door, pushed gently, and let it close between us. No shouting, no dramatics, only the final sound of the latch catching. Their voices muffled, footsteps retreating down the porch steps until the night was silent again. I leaned against the door, not shaken, not triumphant, but certain. The line had been drawn, and there would be no stepping back. The sale would move forward, and with it, my life. The closing took place in a modest office in Marshall, a far cry from the noise and chaos that had surrounded the cabin for years. I sat at a simple oak table, pen in hand, and signed my name across page after page. Each stroke felt steady, each signature another layer of weight falling away. The attorney slid the final confirmation across the desk. His tone professional, but I heard something in his words that no one in my family had given me in years. Respect. The funds transferred into my account that afternoon, and I had already decided how they would be used. A portion went into a trust for my grandchild, a structure so tight that neither Asher nor Belle could ever touch it. It wasn't generosity toward them, it was protection for the only innocent person left in the storm. The rest I kept simple. I closed every lingering account tied to family use, severed the automatic drafts for utilities, and deleted the shared credit portal from my bookmarks. Years of spreadsheets, reminders, and excuses disappeared with a few keystrokes. For the first time in decades, my financial life carried only one name: mine. Driving out of Marshall, I lowered the windows and let the pine-scented air rush in. Behind me, the cabin no longer loomed as a burden waiting for the next bill. Ahead stretched open road, wide and unclaimed. I followed the highway west toward the hills where a different kind of morning waited. I found a limestone cottage in Wimberley, tucked between oak trees where the Blanco River bent slow and clear. It wasn't large or grand, but it was mine alone. The first morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, warm and unhurried. I brewed coffee without bracing for messages stacked high with demands. I sat at the small wooden table and realized the silence wasn't emptiness, it was freedom. Each day began with a walk along the river. The water carried the color of sky and stone, and I let its sound wash through me, steady and constant. Afternoons I spent reading on the porch, evenings cooking dinners I actually wanted to eat, not rushed meals crammed between favors for others. I planted herbs in clay pots by the window, watched them grow, and felt a patience in myself I had nearly forgotten. At night, I sat at my desk with a clean notebook. On the first page, I wrote in my own hand I was never useless. I was used. I underlined it once and closed the book. That truth was enough. Weeks passed. The family group chat went silent, then disappeared from my phone altogether. The calls stopped. Their absence, once unthinkable, became a balm. I didn't chase the quiet. I let it stay. And in that stillness, I heard something I hadn't in years: my own voice. I thought often of the brunch table in New Orleans, the sneers, the practiced chuckles, the way I had once sat as a backdrop to their laughter. But the memory no longer stung. It was only a marker on a map, the point where I finally turned away. I understood now that peace had never lived in their approval. It lived in the strength to walk away, to draw a line, to claim my own life without apology. One afternoon, as I sat by the river, I thought of Asher as a boy, small hand curled in mine, eyes bright with trust. I realized I had carried that version of him far longer than I should have, clinging to a memory that no longer matched the man he had become. Letting go of the cabin was more than shedding a property. It was releasing the illusion that holding everything together would somehow hold love together too. I had been wrong about that. Love that depends on silence, on sacrifice without recognition, is not love. It is consumption. And I had finally stepped out of its reach. To those who have ever felt invisible in their own families, who have carried more than their share while being told it wasn't enough, I leave this truth: you are not useless. You are simply used, and there is life bright, free, and waiting on the other side of letting go. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful true life stories. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear them.